How cool is that, right? She has her way of doing things. I have my way of doing things. I don't think I could have gotten there without that conversation. Mm-hmm. And yet for the 2/3, sorry, I won't say her name for her own privacy, but for 2/3 of the conversation, I'm thinking to myself, like, this is an already difficult thing, made more difficult by the fact that there's this other picture of it and a version of it that she's but then boom, you hit this convergence. Mm-hmm. And that's real synergy, right? I certainly couldn't have come up with that on my own. So while I say I place value on the internal processor, I know with certainty I could not have gotten there if I hadn't actually felt and met the friction of what she was bringing mm-hmm. forward, and her willingness to bend a bit and my willingness to accept a bit.
Right, because you were doing something together, right? You were doing something mm-hmm. together that involved real and open communication. So you had to be able to say, hey, this is how I think and feel, and put that out there and test it and bounce it off the other person and take inside what the other person thinks and said. There's a really complicated process there, which is how human beings come to understand one another or come to agree or come to a place where there's a way forward, even if there isn't complete agreement, right? We have to do these things outside of us. Most often, if we're going to be at our healthiest, we do want to be able to do some of it inside, right? It's a good place to start, and we can do that alone with ourselves. And we're talking about reflective capacity and inclination, but none of us knows how to do something we haven't been taught to do, right? So very often, we haven't had a way of going inside, of saying, well, I'm going to think about myself and I want to do that productively. And part of what I'm trying to bring to the fore is that there are ways of going about being with yourself, thinking about yourself, thinking within yourself that can lead us towards progress at least, and sometimes answers. And if we're doing that, we can probably all do more of that than we're doing. And if we're given a way to do it where we think, okay, this works for me, I'm actually learning about myself while I'm doing this, and I'm bringing a vetted self, I'm bringing my best self to what I'm going to find outside of me. And that may be collaboration with another person, right? It may be talking with another person and coming to some middle ground when there is an agreement. So if we start with ourselves and we're able to reflect and to bring self-understanding to the fore, we're much, much stronger, right? In a good way, not stronger in that we're going to force our way through things, but we're much stronger in terms of both self-knowledge and ability to be flexible when we're out in the real world meeting other people.
Yeah, I think to me, the picture of internal processing people is one that, and maybe I've seen too many movies and shows from my childhood, but the picture is one of, okay, people who internally process bring the best version of themselves forward. They don't burden other people, but I think by now we understand as a culture that that person, while traditionally was kind of revered. This is a kind of a male-centric phenotype here, picture that I'm drawing. It could be about a woman as well. There's also this idea that they're a little bit disconnected from all the chatter. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, I have this belief, like if people are externally processing a lot, that they're also revealing their uncertainty, and that that's not a good thing to reveal to the world. And again, this probably reflects my age and the times when I was raised and a bit about the culture and my family, et cetera. But I think in general, that's like, we never really talk about like strong silent type, but lazy, right? Like we're thinking strong silent and therefore getting stuff done, mm-hmm. right? Like the tacit message there is strong and silent, so they're not burdening other people with their internal stuff. We also assume that people who process internally are actually processing, that they're not just sitting there. I used to joke, what's my bulldog Costello thinking about? And I know this isn't true, but I used to think it was white noise. Like maybe he was just sitting there experiencing the world as white noise. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking about. So it
could have been quantum physics.
Could have been quantum physics. I doubt that, but it could have been quantum. And if it was,
it was good at keeping a secret.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And the picture actually works because he was a big kind of stoic dog. He had his joyful expression, but there's something about this notion of somebody that processes internally that gets a lot done and maybe even serves others, although more than somebody who's processing externally. And it's hard to probe this area without kind of setting up natural gender stereotypes here. I think the stereotype is that women externally process more than men. I don't know that that's actually true. It just might be that men process less overall. I mean, who knows? Who the hell knows what anyone else is thinking? Half the time I don't know what I'm thinking. So do you think that people who hold it in more are coming to a greater understanding and get more done in the world than those that externally process?
No, I think not necessarily. I think what's best for us is a balance. And again, it's going to be different for each person, but there has to be a balance of things that I know and understand inside of myself that aren't up for question, that I am sure of and resolved about. So it might be a line not to cross because it's a certain moral boundary. I know how I feel about it, and I know where I am. I know how I feel, and I know where I stand. So it's just one example. There are issues of self that we want to feel very resolved. How I want to treat people in the world and how I want to be treated. For example, it's good to know those things inside of us, but it is good to then test externally about how we're interfacing with the world. If too much internal processing can be too self-referential, and now I may think that how I think it should be is actually how it should be because I haven't tested outside of me and I haven't done enough of that testing to see a lot of other people feel differently than me. And this isn't a moral point where I feel sure about how I feel. There's actually more gray in it than I might have thought, as an example. So there has to be a balance. I mean, it's always been this way for humans, a balance of what we discern and know inside, but bringing that vetted self to the world means that the vetted self also knows that it doesn't know everything, right? And it's testing in the outside world to learn what is it that other people are thinking. Can I learn from that? So bringing in openness is also very important about a lot of things. So I think that no one way of being is better. I think we all need a balance. That balance is going to differ, and it involves knowing things about ourselves and feeling resolute, and also having the humility to face the world with openness and realizing there's a lot of things I may think I know or think I know exactly how something is or how something should be. But let me hold on for a second and kind of check that with the outside world so that I don't become too self-referential where we can become bigoted or prejudiced. I mean, those can be outcomes, or we can just step a little bit into it, ignorance that there's more in the world than our own opinions.
As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 for nearly 15 years now. I discovered it way back in 2012, long before I had a podcast, and I've been taking it every day since. AG1 is, to my knowledge, the highest quality and most comprehensive of the foundational nutritional supplements on the market. It combines vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, and adaptogens into a single scoop that's easy to drink and tastes great. It's designed to support things like gut health, immune health, and overall energy. And it does so by helping to fill any gaps that you might have in your daily nutrition. And of course, we should all eat high-quality whole foods, but most of us are probably not getting enough prebiotics, vitamins, and minerals, and AG1 ensures that those gaps are filled. I get asked all the time by people if they were to take just one supplement, what would my recommendation for that supplement be? And my answer is always AG1, because it's just been so critical for supporting all aspects of my physical health, mental health, and performance by covering those nutritional, what we call foundational bases. And I know from my own experience and from everyone I've heard that I recommended it to, that they simply feel much better in a number of different ways when they take it regularly. If you'd like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to get a special offer. For a limited time, AG1 is giving away a week's supply of AGZ, which is their sleep supplement, and a free bottle of vitamin D3K2 with your subscription. AGZ is something that I helped design. It tastes great, and it's the only sleep supplement I take. It has a collection of different things in it that has dramatically improved my sleep, both my slow wave deep sleep and my rapid eye movement sleep, and I absolutely love it. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman to get a week's supply of AGZ and a bottle of D3K2 with your subscription. Veering towards some questions about physiology and how it relates to all this, but I want to just peel back one more layer on this kind of, admittedly, extreme example of kind of, I don't want to use strong silent. I want it to be internal processor, external processors. And I actually right now I'll try and disintegrate the strong silent type because people immediately default to male, and I'm not doing that for political correctness, but I think about my graduate advisor, Barbara Chapman, incredibly smart person. And my chair of department years ago described her perfectly when he said she's quiet but not shy. So she could sit and be in a room and observe and pay attention. When she spoke, you really did get the sense that it counted, high signal to noise, because she wasn't one to chatter much.
Right.
There does seem to be this assumption that if people are talking a lot, that there's a lot going on in there all the time, and some of it's just getting out. And that if people are quiet, that it's either more regulated or there's not a whole lot going on in there, right? And I think my chairman's mention about my graduate advisor really woke me up. I thought, you're right. She's really quiet, but she's not shy. She's not afraid to speak. She's very organized and deliberate in what she says. Mm-hmm. And I can't say it was always of value. Forgive me, Barbara. She's passed away, but sometimes it was just, casual talk. But you did get the sense she's a thinker. It's not white noise in there.
Mm-hmm.
And you do sometimes get the sense that people who are constantly, sending words out into the world, that it has an anxiety component. It doesn't necessarily seem that organized, but you and I have both met, I'm sure many people know people who are hyperverbal, but very structured in their hyperverbalness.
Right.
So I guess I'm asking this because I want to break down the notions of quiet versus verbal. Introspective necessarily means calm. So many assumptions around all this. None of it is necessarily true. And the reason I'm so genuinely curious about this is I think that most of the world is confronted with this Mark Andreessen provocative question, like how much time should we spend in here and how does it serve us when we're out here in the rest of the world, and vice versa. Like if we're just talking, doing all day, maybe we are processing and we can be peaceful inside, lay our head down and that's it. It's all out there, for better or worse. But for us, it's great.
Yeah.
But there's this assumption that we're constant, whatever we see is also happening internally.
Yeah, I think we have to just be very, very wary of either mapping some stereotype of this is good and that's not good, and applying some value system to it when we're outside of looking at a person in a context, right? Because all of those things, being internalized, speaking less, or being hyperverbal, they could mean anything, anything under the sun. It has to be who is the person and what is the context. So if you're describing Barbara Chapman in meetings, right, I interpret that as she's communicating judiciously, right? She's in a place where maybe sometimes people say excess things because they're self-aggrandizing or they want to bring something up or they're trying to guide a conversation one way or another. And you think, no, that's a place for where less is more, right? We're not doing that and just communicating about something that matters when it matters. Like, wow, that's speaking judiciously. I mean, that's what it tells me about her. I don't know if her mind was going a mile a minute inside or if there was, a calm and equanimity, but I think who that person was and what that situation was adaptive, right? Same thing if there's someone who's speaking a lot, but they just have a lot of ideas and they're really constructive ideas and they're talking to people about those ideas and they're enthusiastic and it's helpful. Well, that sounds good to me, right? That sounds very different than someone who's hyperverbal and they're talking, but you can tell they're saying the same thing, but coming from a different angle and they're anxious and they may want validation, right? So the person in the context makes all the difference. I mean, we want to be able to identify, when a person might fit a certain profile, right? There are people who are quiet because they said they're strong and they're silent and there's not a lot going on inside, but they're resolute. Okay, that's a kind of person, right? But we shouldn't assume that someone is that way until we've looked at who is that person and what is the context in which we're assessing them. We're human, so we fit patterns, right? But we're all unique, so you won't know what pattern we may be fitting until you really look at us.
One thing I love about your book is you have probe questions. You have questions for people to ask themselves.
Thank you.
To explore the self. And I think for me, that is a huge gift of the book and the work in it. When I got to see an advanced copy, I was like, obviously you understand the theory and the science and you're a clinician, but for me, okay, what do I ask myself? And how do I go about doing that? How do I figure out what's going right at least as a stepping stone to maybe exploring what's not going right, but certainly to really understand where my strengths might lie. And I think it's a really unique gift because I think that we don't have enough of that. I think we have a lot of what's going wrong, where are the friction points, right. What's wrong with me kind of stuff, right. And what's wrong with the world. And I think starting from that place of really knowing what the questions are to ask oneself is, I just personally found it immensely useful.
Yeah.
So, and I realize we're mainly discussing theory and up until now, although I'm about to ask you a very practical question, which is assuming no pathology, no life-crippling anxiety or depression or panic, how much do you think people should try and adjust their, what I call the autonomic set point? Some people are just more expressive with their hands, with their words. They want to move a lot more. And if they don't, it makes them anxious.
Right.
Other people are more still. And we, again, assume that if they're physically still, that things are probably a bit more still internally, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there is a lot of emphasis, including on this podcast, on learning to sit with stress, learning to sit with anxiety, and not just letting it out or experiencing it. And sometimes I wonder, despite knowing the immense value of those tools, I mean, I've benefited so much from things like non-sleep deep rest and meditation and things like that. And I know others have as well. But I mean, how much should we be trying to control our states? I do wonder if it's good for us to think that there's something wrong for us if we feel a certain way, period.
I think controlling our states in order to help us be at our best is different from trying to control our states so that we change ourselves, right? So if you're finding, a deep state of peace that's not sleep, right? You find, that helps you be a better you, right? That finding that peace, just it gives you some groundedness and you feel healthier for it and you're better able to solve problems. So, you're learning something and doing something because it serves you well and it helps you be at your best, right? That's different than thinking, I need to be different, right? If a person thinks, I need to be different and I need to be calmer or more peaceful, what does that mean? And is that person imposing something external on themselves? So there are people who are very active and yes, they can sit quietly sometimes, right? But they're not really built for it, right? They're active people and it works for them to be active. And they may be quite meditative when they don't seem to be quite meditative, right? They can be doing something and we see a lot of movement in them, but inside they can be in a meditative state. So it's so easy for us to, it's well-meaning in that we're trying to understand, right? We're trying to understand ourselves and we're trying to understand others and we're trying to find patterns, but it's so tempting to think that we know something, right? Because we're just observing someone in a certain state or we're observing someone talking or not talking, right? It's like, what does that mean? And we have to ask the right questions, right? In order to get there. So the only way we really know the answers for a person is we have to understand that person and we have to understand their context. So we must ask the right questions. You had talked about trying to write practical routes of approach to ourselves in the book, right? I'm doing that because, think of if someone wanted to learn physics. Would you say, well, just stop, go somewhere and think about physics, right? Like, no, there has to be a route of approach of saying, well, here's some of the basic knowledge, think about this, approach that way, read from this book and then that book, right? Like, there are ways that we are guided in how to learn things. And it's interesting that we don't have these guides for what's most important, which is learning about ourselves. So it brings us back to why it can make us so uncomfortable, so anxious to say, okay, we're going to sit with ourselves. It's like saying, well, sit with yourself and learn horticulture. It's like, well, I don't know, like, I'll sit with myself, but you have to help me. You have to help me figure out how to learn that, or I'm going to feel anxious about sitting there if I don't know how to go about it, right? So if we have the prompts to look at ourselves now, what we're doing is we're making it real. We're asking the right questions of ourselves to think, how do I function? What does work well for me? How do I think of myself? How do others think of me? Am I introverted or extroverted? Am I a combination of both? Do I sometimes feel in one state and sometimes in another? Is it working for me, right? Is it working for me in the big picture? Are there parts of the small picture that work for me or things I really don't like or things where I really don't feel uncomfortable? Now we're bringing curiosity. And yes, we want to learn from patterns and learn from all the knowledge we have of the world, but we're taking that and saying, hey, none of that actually means anything until it's directed towards me, if I'm the person reflecting about myself, or if it's a helping process, we're helping a friend or we're in a therapy process. We have to take everything that we know and then it's all seen through the lens of that person. And we have to do it that way or we'll lead ourselves astray.
If you're willing, I'm curious about throwing out a sort of a generic clinical session example. Let's assume you know something about the family background of a patient and there's nothing glaringly obvious in the background about trauma, or maybe there is, but that there's nothing really to dig into there just yet. And the person comes to you and says, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, work is okay, but this and so at work at that. And I guess this is good. And, and they're dating, they're in their life. And I swear I'm not trying to get a free therapy session here. I'm just trying to imagine. So someone says, and then like the news is really bothering me and, and just kind of reporting.
Right.
You observe human patterns. I mean, your pattern recognition is presumably oriented towards where there's emotion, where there's patterns in them, how it matches to templates that only you could harbor, the same way that a really amazing neurosurgeon would look into the brain and see a pattern of epileptic seizure and would be like, okay, this is, even without remembering those specific cases, I know which direction to go at this to explore. When you hear all that stuff, and the stuff I'm talking about here is deliberately meant to reflect what you see a lot of on social media. Upset about that political team, upset about that political team. My life is this, but this. What does that tell you? And what does it tell you specifically about where that person should invest effort into thinking or doing? I realize it's impossible to give a pan prescriptive here, but Like, what does that mean when somebody's just really absorbed by all the things going on around them and things feel good, but where do you start to probe and where do you start to encourage them, at least until the next session?
The way to probe is to encourage reflection, right? Because with what you said, I think, well, I'm hearing somebody reporting, right? It's like they're just telling me the news, right, of what went on. I'm doing this, I'm doing that.
Yeah, my mom did this, and then my dad did that. Yeah.
It's kind of an inventory or a laundry list, right? So what it makes me think is, I wonder how much of that you're really choosing, right? Or how much of that is intentional, or how much of that is just a reflex.
The behaviors that in their life, how much of it they're choosing, or the reporting?
No, the behaviors, how much of what they're reporting, like how much of that are you really choosing, right? How much of that is what you want to be doing? How much of that is working for you, right? What we're trying to do then, or what I want to do then is encourage, like to have some interest in examination of like, whoa, why am I doing all of this, right? Maybe some of this I really like and I am interested in, and others of it I'm just doing because it's habit or it's routine. I don't even know why I'm doing it. Or, if I'm dating, who am I dating? Why am I dating? How am I choosing? Is that also just something that I do? How much am I just kind of along for the ride of what I'm doing that just has forward momentum versus what am I really choosing? Now, if we stop and we look at it that way, what are you really choosing? And also what's working for you? Now we're off to the races of an examined life. And, we see this, as I know we do a lot of intensive work. We do it with individuals, we do it with couples, where we try and move this process forward very, 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 very rapidly of looking at one's own life. And it's very interesting that sometimes, by midway through the second day of an intensive process, the person wants to revisit almost everything. They realize, 10, 20% of all those things I just said, this is what I do, right? I really value and I want to be doing more of. The others I'm not so sure of. Right? I don't know why I'm doing some of those things. Now, again, we're really along the process of change because we're looking at ourselves. And it may seem strange that someone would say the 80% of what I just told you I do, I don't know if I want to do or if it's working for me, but that happens all the time. When we're not examining our lives, they just kind of run forward and we accumulate what we accumulate, right? And it's like, well, this is what we are, because this is what I've accumulated by, grabbing and carrying with me as I'm moving through life. And there's not an organization to it. So this idea that we must examine our lives is at the heart of all of this. That's how we keep mental health and our structure of self and in our function of self. We keep our drives in balance. We set ourselves on a path where we are in a place to meet future challenges from the best health we can have, and also to meet future opportunities. So just like we want to do with our physical health, right? We want to build good physical health. Likewise, we want to build good mental health. When that's the best way to be when life throws us whatever curveballs are going to come our way. And it's also the best way to have a good life, to be on the front foot of life. But we need to examine ourselves, and we need a process and a structure in order to build good mental health the way we build good physical health. And ultimately, that's how we build good health.
What I'm hearing is, in order to gain more agency over any areas of our life, we have to ask the why question. Why am I doing what I'm doing now? And why aren't I doing this other thing that perhaps would serve me better? Like it starts with questions of self. What do you do? And this must be incredibly frustrating, at least it would be to me. What do you do if you say, well, why aren't, the person says, well, I know I should work out, but I don't. And you say, well, why not? And they say, well, I don't know. I'm tired. I know I should. And then you say, well, why do you still hang out with Sharon when you always come back from it feeling totally exhausted and feeling like you've just had all this stuff done? I don't know. Like, how do you work past the person who's just like, this is just life. This is just what life requires. I got to work. I got my friends. Like, what am I going to do? Overhaul my life, and this probably varies by region and by generation, the extent to which people are willing to like look at things and think and kind of spin them around, like rotate the cube, as I like to call it, and look at it from underneath a bit. And just as a practice, like just some people that's okay, cool. I'll play no one listens to albums anymore, but the same way they used to, but I'll play the album in reverse for a bit. Maybe it'll give me something different. Maybe people are like, that's the album. Like, that's just how I do it. So how do you get somebody to do this? And of course, I'm not asking you to tell us this so that people can play therapist with others, even though they naturally do. I'm asking this because hopefully this is what people will do for themselves.
Well, if someone is talking in the way of the person you described, right? They're saying, well, this is just what I do. And they're describing, I think you said, every time they go out with Sharon, they come home and they feel kind of drained and they don't feel good. Then they move on to something else and to something else. And they might talk about their job and, something that's frustrating them all the time. And they just keep going forward. Then I might say, well, what you're doing is you're showing both of us where the X's are. The X's mark the spot, right, to dig, right? So you're showing us, hey, here's where there's some treasure, right? Let's dig where this X is. So if you're going out with someone and every time you see that person, you come home and you feel a sense of lethargy and you feel a sense of time wasn't well spent and you kind of feel hopeless, well, it's really important to think about why you're doing that, right? And I would link it to something else. So I might say, so, you had said earlier on or a couple of sessions ago that you really want to find a partner and you really want to find a good relationship. So that's important to you. You told me that it was. And now you're telling me that you keep seeing this person where every time you go out the front door that nothing good is going to come of it and you're going to come back feeling worse than when you left. Like, we should look at why. And we don't have to be scared to look at why, because this is where the fear comes in. Like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? Why would I be doing that, right? Somewhere inside of them, that person knows that's not working for me, but I'm still doing it. So there's some fear of looking at that. So if we say, hey, no harm, no foul, like, let's think about why. It may be that person really wants that person, in this case, I think it's Sharon, I want Sharon to like them, right? And maybe they feel a need to be liked. So they don't like this person, but they think they need this person to like them. Maybe they're a person who always takes too much care of others versus themselves. And they don't like Sharon, but Sharon likes them, right? So they don't really want to end that relationship. Right? There's something going on there because the person is saying, hey, I'm doing this thing that absolutely won't get me what I want. And I'll keep doing it. You say, well, that's not really what you want. If you are doing it over and over again, you think you're going to keep doing it. It's just because you haven't felt empowered enough that, hey, I can understand myself and I can bring some change so that my behaviors, my choices are actually in line with my wishes, with my strivings. So now we get that person interested, right? And we tell them that there is an X. Let's understand why it is that you're still going out with Sharon, right? There's got to be something to learn there. And there always is. If we dig where the X's are, we do get some treasure. It might be a little, it might be a lot, but we learn from that and we bring that learning to life. The rubber hits the road as that leads to real life change.
That makes really good sense. And thank you for the clarity of that answer. It brings us back to asking why to develop more agency around possibly making different choices. It's not always, I guess one could realize like they really, they want that kind of relationship, but with someone else, or they want a completely different kind of relationship with the same person, right? And to work on that. But it starts with asking questions.
Yes.
I realize I'm going backwards into this, but it goes from inventories are a start toward informing what questions are useful. Mm-hmm. Useful questions probe understanding that hopefully develops more agency. Do you encourage people, once they get to a point of, oh yeah, like maybe I want a different sort of relationship to this person or thing or activity in life, do you give them specific action directives? Like, yeah, like how about between this session and next session, like you go to the gym twice. You do whatever there. Mm-hmm. Maybe watch TV and just like pedal, on the bike, and or maybe you go and you like really take a course or a class rather. Do you tend to give people clear directives about what could really help if you sense that could really help?
Sometimes, but I think it's much more effective if it's arrived at collaboratively. So if we decide, hey, it'd be really, really good, and we both agree, we've talked back and forth now, and if you can get to the gym once before you come back next week, right? And then we talk about that back and forth. Like maybe that person wants to go to the gym 5 times, before they come back. But each time they do that, they get frustrated with themselves and they don't go at all, right? So we might say, look, we've been talking about this, and maybe I'll say it, or maybe the patient will say it, right? And to say, look, I do want to be going to the gym. I want to be getting exercise. And I go between too much and too little, right? I go between taking on too much and I get frustrated and I don't do anything. How about something that's more measured? Okay. Maybe I'll try and go on Monday and Friday. Maybe decide, yeah, you know what? Maybe twice is okay. Or should it be once? Right? Because if you get once under your belt, you can get twice under your belt the next week. So we're just trying to understand. So there's no mystery to it. And we know what we're doing. So someone who wants to have a different relationship and says, well, maybe I could have a good relationship with Sharon, but I'd have to talk to her about A, B, and C that isn't really going well. Okay, how might you do that? Right? Like, let's think about it, right? Because that communication isn't going to happen unless you bring it. And what's keeping you from that? How might you approach her in a way that you could really talk? What's holding you back? So we're trying to problem solve, but we're doing so in a way that's open, where we know what we're doing and we're not bringing some magic or mystery to it. We're trying to move ahead, and we understand it's one step at a time, and we want to take those steps. So we don't want someone to think, often we want a process of change to occur so fast it can't possibly occur as fast as we want it to, and then we get frustrated in 2 weeks, right? So we have to set reasonable expectations of, hey, it might be, you could really get somewhere with this in a couple of months. It seems like that from our conversations. What do you think? We make sure we're on the same page, and then we say, well, 1 week after another, like we could put one foot in front of the other, and we can get ourselves there. And it's not easy. So it might not be easy to say, broach that first conversation with Sharon, or get yourself to the gym that first time. Right. But we can help you bolster yourself so all your arrows are going in the same direction. You set yourself up for success. You're not going to try to go the morning after a long night out. And, we set you up for success, and you get a win. And small wins empower and embolden us to take a little bit more chances and get bigger wins. And, if our structure of self and our function of self are in good places, then what rests on top of that is